Hey, AP Euro guys, Walls, we're back here. Um, Hopefully you've gotten started on um, sort of this period of the Congress of Vienna and conservative Europe. As with the end of Napoleon, all of the leaders of Europe are all kinds of freaked out, and they don't want this to ever happen again. So they have come up with a Congress that is going to make Europe safe for monarchy again. Well, this works to some extent, but right now I'm going to kind of talk about how forces are going to start to take hold that are going to challenge the this dream of conservative monarchies that's going through Europe. Now, of course, with the end of Napoleon, with Waterloo in 1850, and when we get to 1815 and the Congress of Vienna, the tide at that point is in the favor of conservatism, because all of Europe is exhausted from fighting Napoleon and from fighting France. We got up to our sixth coalition with this Napoleonic thing. So at first, Europe is a bit tranquil, but what we start to see emerging in Europe immediately after Napoleon, and a lot of this has to do with Napoleon, because remember, Napoleon and the Civil Code of Napoleon was all over Europe, and what he was, I know it seems like he's sort of a fascist dictator, but in actuality, he is kind of spreading Enlightenment ideals, and as were the soldiers that were marching all over, the German Confederation, Austria, Prussia, Russia. So these sort of Enlightenment ideals have kind of gotten hold in Europe to some extent. So with the end of Napoleon, you have a Bourbon Restoration, and the Bourbon Restoration is Charles XVIII. Charles XVIII is going to have to sign a constitutional charter, because the French are okay with getting the monarchy back. Anything stable they really don't have a lot of bargaining power, but the monarch is going to have to sign a constitution, and so France has something of a constitutional monarchy. Charles XVIII has a fair amount of power. He will actually abuse his power to some extent, but he does have this constitution kind of hanging over his head. Now, when he dies in 1824, Charles X, his brother, takes over. Okay? Now, Charles X has kind of seen a lot of liberalism creeping back into French society. So Charles X immediately passes these July ordinances, and the July ordinances, he takes over in 1824. Yeah, takes over in 1824. He passes the July ordinances, I want to say in 1830, as he starts to get more and more conservative power. Charles X is a pretty conservative individual. And so by 6 years into his reign, he has already banned freedom of the press. He has gotten rid of the middle class voting rights. He has dissolved the Chamber of Deputies, which was there to kind of be a counter voice, a constitutional counter voice to his monarchy. And he then sends the police off raiding newspapers, and any newspaper that was deemed seditious. Charles would kind of just send in his henchmen, and they would, take whoever they needed to take, and they'd rot in jail, that kind of thing. These July ordinances initiate a July Revolution in 1830. So this is going to be the second major French Revolution. They'll also have one in 1848. So you have the 1789 Revolution. You have, Napoleon it takes over. You kind of count that as a revolution, but then you have this 1830 revolution, which is again a liberal revolution. Now, with this, they are going to get rid of Charles X, and I think he's going to have to abdicate. I don't think they don't kill him. He abdicates in favor of a guy by the name of Louis Philippe. And Louis Philippe, at 1830, when Louis Philippe takes over, they have turned France into a constitutional monarchy. So it is formally something very similar to what ironically, very similar to what the original revolutionaries of 1789 kind of dreamed up. Anyway, that's France. And France, France is one of these things where Paris was, of course, the hotbed where this July Revolution started. And it's another one of these barricade things. They're going to put 4,000 barricades up and keep everybody out of Paris and this, that, and the other thing. But, the whole reason, everything today is kind of showing you this liberalism and how it's the liberalism of this period, of the 1800s, is a nationalistic liberalism, which doesn't really make a lot of sense based on what we know now about. We typically don't equate liberalism and nationalism. But this is sort of this period where the nationalism is what is kind of fueling these liberal movements. This whole love of country. And it's this love of country that is kind of pushing for a lack of a dictator. So the same thing's going to happen. Very similar things are going to happen in 1819 in Carlsbad, Bohemia. You're going to have, I mentioned in the last video, you're going to have some. I got to move this forward so I'm not right. Well, whatever. You're going to have the German Confederation is going to be a pretty conservative confederation, as is everybody. It's a conservative order thanks to the Congress of Vienna. There's no way around that. So if you're a leader of a given region, you just would rather sort of kiss the ass of the Congress of Vienna because you see that as the extension of the Sixth Coalition. Like, this is the power base of Europe. So in Bohemia in 1819, you have one of these nationalistic movements, which is largely led by students. And you're going to have an assassination of a conservative author, Kotzebue, by a guy by the name of Carl Sand. And this is going to kind of, there's not a whole chain of events. It's more you see immediate response from the Conservative Confederation. And so what they're going to do in 1819, right after this assassination, and they had tried to assassinate a couple people, but right after this assassination in the German Confederation, they crack down right away. And they end any kind of a student organization, no gatherings of more than 50 people at a time. You have the removal of any liberal professor. Wouldn't be a problem, to be honest with you, for me. Not advocating anything. You have no secret societies. One of the things that's happening here, because you have this Congress of Vienna, is you have a bunch of secret societies emerging, and this is where people get together and they kind of talk about revolutionary ideas. Okay, the Carlsbad decrees will also get rid of the newspapers that you have to get. It's going to be one of those. You'll notice a theme with all this. Whether it's the July Revolution, the July ordinances, which bring about the July Revolution, whether it's these Carlsbad decrees, or whether it's Peterloo, the next thing I'm going to talk about in England, the one thing that you see is they go right after the press instantaneously, because the press wields tons of power. They also don't want people getting together and talking, because liberal ideas tend to spread like a coronavirus. When people, just kidding about that part there. It's maybe too soon. Anyway, I'm sorry. But those ideas of those revolutionary ideas are spreading. So yes, the Carlsbad decrees will outlaw these newspapers and so forth. And then the one thing that's sort of the kicker is going to be they start with these like brown shirt committees, these things that fascist countries like to do. They create like a brown shirt, or I forget what they're called in 1830, some kind of investigating committee into student organizations. So taking a look, we see France, we have this July Revolution in 1830, and this is a response to censorship. The Carlsbad decrees in 1819 will be a response to a liberal movement as well. And then finally, the same year as the assassination of Kotzebue in Bohemia, we have the people, the Chartists from Manchester, England. The Chartists from Manchester are going to get together and march at a place called St. Peter's Fields. So this large gathering is, it's going to be a peaceful gathering, allegedly, but in a sort of a panic, because England, because of how Manchester is a very poor working class area. Because of that, the British are sort of on high alert with any of this. So they will send in a bunch of troops with bayonets to disperse the crowd. Well, it's one of those things where a baby gets killed, trampled, I think. And then like 18 to 20 people are killed. And, you would assume at that point that the government would apologize and maybe grant some liberal concessions to the people of Liverpool and Manchester. Well, that is not the way it works. Oh, and you know what? Oh, they were angry about the Corn Laws. That's what they were marching on about, the Corn Laws. The British had enacted some corn laws to keep to prevent grain from coming in from other countries, and it kept the price of bread up really high. So the people of Liverpool and Manchester, that's what they were upset about. Bear with me, I'm just kind of trying to run this stuff by you, so I might get lost at times. Anyway, the response was not one of apology and kindness and concession. The response was, let's pass something called the Six Acts in 1819. The Six Acts, ACTS, were essentially the exact same thing as the Carlsbad decrees. They were very similar to the July ordinances. There is things like no military training for civilians. They seize arms from all civilians. All civilians are forced to turn over their arms. They expedite court processing so they can just get people into jail, for sedition like that. Then again, the no public meetings, no private organizations. All organizations have to be approved. And they actually enact sedition acts. So there is no blasphemy, no anti-government rhetoric, none of that. So, really quickly, I'm trying to keep these really short because I know it's just not fair to ramble on and on and on. But real quickly, just to the whole theme of this is Europe has a Congress of Vienna in place, or this concert of Europe, this conservative concert of Europe is in place. It will be in place until the First World War. However, we are starting to see fractures within the conservative order. And one of those is 1830, the July Revolution, which was in France, which was a response against Charles X and the July Ordinances. Then we are in Bohemia going to see the Carlsbad decrees, which are going to be put in place as a response to an assassination and just student liberal nationalists. And finally, we have these poor saps who are trying to protest in St. Peter's Fields, Peterloo, and they will be, harmed. There's like 400 people, I think, are actually really hurt. 18 or something dead, but they will pass the 6 acts, which are, again, pure censorship. So the next talk, I'd like you to go into your book, and I'd like you to read up on the revolutions of 1848. And the next time I talk with you, it'll be through the revolutions of 1848. So the next reading will be, I'm going to check your notes on Friday. Let's try and do a Friday note check, turn them in, take pictures of them or something. I don't even know how that works. Just turn them in. I'll take a look at them and I'll give you 30 points. And so what should be in those notes? In those notes should be, let's see, go look at the July Revolution, look at the Carlsbad decrees, and look at Peterloo. Get those in your notes. And whatever the first 5 pages of that last assignment were, I'll take a look and see. Anyway, guys, until next time, keep fighting the pandemic. Miss y'all.